Oh, what up, everybody? Welcome to Show Me the Meaning, Wisecracks Movie Podcast, the podcast where we do a deep dive into the films that you love. What's going down? I am Austin Hayden, and Raymond is still away making his movie, so we are joined by Wisecracks' own special insider, writer, director, producer, slashy extraordinaire, Amanda. What's up, Amanda?
Oh, hey. I wish I
Well,
was making a movie.
well, next. You're
Yeah,
next.
yeah, yeah. That's pretty cool of Raymond. Yeah, I'm doing great. Stoked to talk about these interesting, not quite twin films, but
Yeah, it's interesting. We'll get into it in a minute, but I was also thinking about other films that would have been interesting companion pieces. So maybe have a think about this before I get into it, because I was thinking about like The Substance, and I was thinking about
Mhm.
like Secretary. If you ever saw that Maggie
I was
Gyllenhaal James Spader
I was
film,
literally thinking about
yeah,
Secretary. My
yeah.
friend
So like,
suggested Notes on a Scandal.
oh, I don't know that one. Okay,
Okay.
okay,
But
but
there
lots of
yeah.
companion pieces.
Yeah, definitely. The really OG one would have been The Graduate.
The Graduate. No, the really OG one would have been Hedda Gabler, the Ibsen play,
Yeah.
which features in this film because
Yes.
features in Baby Girl because her husband Antonio Banderas is directing a play version of Hedda Gabler. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that in a minute. But before we get into all the details, just a tiny bit of housekeeping. Just for people that are listening, obviously, if you're tuned in live, what up? Make sure you comment in the comments. Let us know what's going on. Henry will be checking the comments and chats and stuff like that, and we'll be chiming in. Also, by the way, Henry's joining us. Hi, Henry. Hi. Hi. How are you?
Hello. Sorry, I was sending a message to Matt, our producer, so was kind of slow on the switch there. But I'm doing great. I saw Baby Girl for the first time today and thoroughly enjoyed it.
Awesome. Okay, I can't wait to hear your thoughts about it as well. But so if you're live, feel free to chat away in the old chat box there. If you're not and you're listening to us on a podcatcher, yo, what up? If you're ever welcome or if you're ever down, feel free to join us live. We record every single week at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on the Wisecrack 2 channel. Otherwise, don't worry about it. Thank you for tuning in. We love you having us check out what we're doing, even on your podcatcher. And of course, we've got a letterboxd, SMTM Pod. That's SMTM Pod. And you can email us if you got any questions or thoughts or anything like that, wisecrack.smtm@gmail.com. Always want to get that shit out of the way before we get into it. So, look, let's just go straight into the themes of the film. I'm going to give a little synopsis because for people who are curious, what is a versus, right? Is
Yeah. Also,
it
Sydney
Baby Girl?
Barrett in the
Yeah.
Actually, I'm
chat.
curious.
Yeah, Sydney Barrett in the
Yeah.
chat has said, I've seen neither of these movies. So maybe just, yeah, a quick summary of why
Okay.
they're in the versus format, in addition to what the versus
Okay.
format is.
So I've got like full synopses here that I'll read out. So buckle up. And then we'll talk a little bit about like what does a versus even mean, right?
Mm.
So anyway, Baby Girl 2024. Now, everyone has been stylizing this as an erotic thriller. I actually have a big bone to pick about people calling this an erotic thriller. I think that's just a marketing ploy by the distribution company and by people trying to put butts in seats. I don't think this is an erotic thriller. But with that caveat in place, I'm going to just read a pretty standard synopsis here. So, Baby Girl is an American erotic thriller directed by Helena Rain, featuring Nicole Kidman as Romy Mathis, a high powered CEO who embarks on a risky affair with her younger intern Samuel, portrayed by Harris Dickinson. The film delves into themes of power dynamics, desire, and the complexities of female sexuality. Basic plot summary is that Romy Mathis is the CEO of a robotics automation company in New York City. Despite her professional success, she feels unfulfilled in her marriage to Jacob, played by Antonio Banderas, a theater director currently staging a production of Hedda Gabler. Her life takes an unexpected turn when she encounters Samuel, a charismatic young man who intervenes during an incident with an off-leash dog. Later, she discovers that Samuel is an intern at her company and has chosen her as his mentor. Their professional relationship quickly escalates into a passionate affair, Initially hesitant due to their age difference and her marital status, Romy's drawn into Samuel's assertiveness, or she's drawn to Samuel's assertiveness. Their encounters become increasingly intense, with Samuel often challenging Romy's perceptions of control and submission. This relationship forces her to confront her own desires and the societal expectations placed upon her. As the affair progresses, Samuel begins to blur the boundaries between their secret liaison and her personal life. He unexpectedly appears at her family home under the guise of returning a forgotten laptop, ingratiating himself with her family. This intrusion leads to tension between Romy and Samuel, as well as between Romy and her husband, Jacob. The situation becomes more complicated when Esme, Romy's assistant, played by Sophie Wilde, discovers the affair and uses this knowledge to her advantage, threatening to expose Romy unless her demands are met. In an interesting way, though. Not in a way that you might think, and it's something that we can put a button on and discuss later. Faced with the potential collapse of her career and family, she decides to end the affair and confess to Jacob, albeit downplaying the extent of her involvement with Samuel. In an attempt to salvage their marriage, Romy and Jacob explore new dimensions of their relationship, leading to a renewed intimacy. Meanwhile, Samuel accepts a job offer in Japan, effectively removing himself from Romy's life. Now, oh, did we? Okay. Well, while Amanda is reconnecting... Oh,
Back.
She's back. Oh, we can't hear you. We lost her. Nope.
You can hear
Still
me.
muted. Oh, now we can. Now we
Okay,
can.
sorry. My window was open and there was a lot of neighborly noise.
That is okay. So we've gone through Baby Girl. Now I'll get into May, December. So May, December came out in 23. It's directed by Todd Haynes, featuring Julianne Moore, Natalie Portman, and Charles Melton. The film delves into complex themes of scandal, media intrusion, and the intricate dynamics of relationships with significant age differences. So the plot summary is the narrative centers on Gracie Atherton Yu, played by Julianne Moore, who 2 decades prior was embroiled in a scandal for engaging in a relationship with Joe Yu, played by Charles Melton, who was a 13-year-old boy at the time. Their affair led to Gracie's imprisonment, but upon her release, they married and started a family. As their children prepare to leave for college, their lives are disrupted by Elizabeth Berry, played by Natalie Portman, who is an actress set to portray Gracie in an upcoming film. Elizabeth's immersive research into their past forces the couple to confront unresolved issues and re-examine their relationship dynamics. I could go into a whole bunch more. There's a whole plot summary there. She ends up seducing the husband in the name of research, I think we might assume. He thinks that there's like a little bit of a crush and that maybe there's something developing between them. But as she says, this is just what adults do. And at the end of it, the film closes with a sequence of her on set playing Julianne Moore in her indie film, seducing her on-screen 13-year-old lover, where they have to do take after take after take because she's approaching the real, approaching it really feeling what it's meant to feel like. So anyway, these are the 2 films. We have placed them side by side. Amanda, they were your choice, if I am right. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. Yeah. That was my choice. My original choice was Under the Silver Lake,
Under the
but
Silver Lake,
we
yeah.
didn't we didn't think it would get enough traction. So I was like, these are both like buzzy, and I think that they're both interesting. And I think that even though like obviously they represent very different kinds of relationships, in that one of them is, is the aftermath of like certainly like abuse, like you have like we have to like kind of say that. I think that they both explore sexuality in different ways that are really interesting and actually are like kind of in conversation with each other, although I
Right.
think they come to super different conclusions.
So then, okay, so if we're stylizing this as a versus, like, let's say what we're not saying with that, and then what are we hoping to accomplish by putting them side by side? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think it's especially easy when it comes to issues of like human relationality and sexuality, that there's no like one right conclusion. So like there's no like one better film necessarily when they're saying such different things about. I mean, should I spoil what I think is like the main crust of the difference between the two?
Yeah, yeah,
Sure,
get
I mean,
into it,
not
and
a
then
spoiler. Yeah, like act 2, end of act 2 spoiler. I mean, I
you
think
gotta
that
wait
ult
for 45 minutes before we tell you what we really
Yeah.
think.
No, I mean, I guess right before I was logging on for this, I was thinking that, like, um, Baby Girl really crystallizes to that, like, sexuality and relationships are about, like, giving, and in May, December, it's very much about, like, taking.
Interesting. Okay.
Like
So,
taking away from someone something.
yeah. Yeah. I like that. That's really interesting. So, what we're not doing in this discussion is we're not going to be like, "What film is better, bro?" Like a cage match kind of thing. Even though I do have an opinion on that. Um,
Ooh.
but
I keep
do,
going
do
back
you,
and forth, actually.
oh, do you? That's
Yeah.
fun. So it's not so much that; it's more about placing them side by side to see in what way can they actually converse with each other. And this is one of my favorite ways of doing film analysis is treating films like objects that think themselves, you know, and letting them sort of set the ground for the themes and then putting them in dialogue with another one and then kind of creating some sort of tension where they can reveal things about each other and where well this one explores this and this one explores that and this one says this but this one says maybe the opposite and how do they interact with each other or maybe they reinforce each other in certain ways. Really interesting to kind of think about. Before we get too much into the idea of giving and taking, which I think is an interesting place to start, Henry, what about you? Initial thoughts on these?
Yeah, I think both of them deal in interesting ways with the libidinal and how not necessarily we repress it, but how we try to address it indirectly in other aspects of our character, and kind of like that what that leads to when it's not properly managed, I'd say.
So, like when the libido isn't able to express itself in trust or fully, how it kind of is forced out into other areas that then become damaging, harmful, predatory, distorted, perverse, etc.
Yeah, and between the two, it has been longer since I've seen May December, but I remember May December at least. That feeling sort of the punchline to it more than the motivating kind of like every scene. Well, every scene in retrospect, once you know the ending, I think makes more sense through that lens. But I feel Baby Girl is very upfront with what it's doing, whereas May December's very much the opposite of that. I'm interested in hearing more about Amanda's discussion of the inversion of the giving and taking because of that.
Yeah, let's get into it. Amanda, what you think?
Okay. So with um Baby Girl obviously like got buzz because it was BDSM adjacent at least, and it was Nicole Kidman, and that's not why both these movies got buzz because they're about older women's sexuality, which we're still like even in like 2025, like, oh, does that exist? Um, Although then like a million think pieces are like it does exist because of Nicole Kidman, but point point
It didn't exist before, but now it does. Yeah. No.
but maybe the better well, I guess what I would say is that, the film opens with, like, Nicole Kidman not being given, like, what she desires, um, and then, like, the relationship that precedes, however whatever level of inappropriate that you think it is, or that it, like, legally is, she is being given something by this character, and she also, you think, is giving something to this character based on the way that the stakes of the relationship feel really high to him, and you don't and there were moments where I was like, "Is he being conniving? Is he just trying to get ahead?" But I think the performance had me, like, pretty convinced that they were they were really in like a negotiation of what each of them needed from the other, as
Isn't
opposed to
that, I
what
mean,
each of
he lays that out pretty clearly in a couple of
yeah.
very on the nose statements about consent and how, like that. There's the first statement about consent, and she even says, "What, did you go to the fucking library and read that?" And he's like,
Yeah.
"No, it's about trust." And I think it's actually really beautiful because he wasn't just parroting some sort of like, I'm trying to be like a woke boy and say the thing that I need to say so that I can get the girl. He was actually being someone who's thoughtfully kind of considered that no, consent is important and it's ultimately based on trust. He's not just reciting something. And for her, that was confronting, I think, because trust is the ultimate foundation. Like, even if you transgress certain areas in a relationship of intimacy, you do that in a negotiation of figuring out where those lines are drawn. And sometimes you cede more trust than you do comfort. And that's something that can only be encountered or experienced in a negotiation with someone where those layers of trust are established and then deepened and then reinforced and checked in with and then whatever. And then there's that bit at the end when he's talking with Antonio Banderas, and
Mhm.
Antonio Banderas says the thing about like, no, domination and stuff like that. It's just like a dude way. And Harris Dickinson's like, nah, dude, that's like an outdated mode of understanding gender politics, you know? So
Yeah, that
there's
was
something
like
so it's very on the nose in some ways, I think.
Yeah, of course, but it is also like her whole like, if you think about it like hero's journey-ish, like she resists the call to ask for what she wants, to see love as to see sex as something where she can be given what she wants because she's so used to not being able to ask for or to be given what she does ask for. So I think that like and then the movie ends, I mean, in a funny way, it is almost like if you look at the book ending, it's a love story between her and her husband more than it is really like about the boy in terms of just the book ending, because it starts out with her, not being satisfied and it ends with her being satisfied, even though she's obviously still fantasizing, but you're kind of led to believe that that's just like human sexuality is complicated and she'll probably always fantasize about this,
Was
fling
she
that she had.
fantasizing? Or could the interpretation of the end be that it's doing a crosscut to show us not her fantasizing that she's the dog, right? But rather, because it's Harris Dickinson, like, with a dog that he's domesticated, which is how it starts, right? It's a very on the nose. It's like this film's version of Save the Cat. Rather than save the cat, he
Yeah.
fucking he tames the dog. But he tames the dog with a cookie. And
And then he gives
he
her milk.
and he yeah and he but it's him domesticating nature, right? He domesticates the wild.
Yeah.
and
No, I definitely
and so
don't
he
think she's the dog in that flashback.
yeah,
I
she's
mean,
not the
in
dog,
that
but
crosscut.
in that cross, well, and see, that's what I was wondering, if it's her allowing herself to be on the receiving end as somebody. She's a CEO who's not ever been allowed to be a receiver. She's got to give,
Yeah.
she's got to keep up appearances, she's got to play a certain way, and then that's neglected her own ability for vulnerability and for weakness. And we see a lot of her weakness and vulnerability and fear and shame, like she's hiding her body at certain times, and she's
She's
hesitant, and
bad at giving speeches and
she's
interviews.
yeah, she's incompetent in a lot of ways, which you wouldn't think, because the film sets it up like this is going to be like Fatal Attraction, and she's like boss bitch, it's going to like take
Yeah.
care of stuff, but it's not that really. And so she's kind of always been, and she has that big scene where she tells to Antonio Banderas, I've always had these fucking things that I've never been able to express. I've never been able to delve into the darkness within. There's something much deeper going on that maybe she doesn't even know how to articulate. And maybe we don't get a resolution at the end, but we get some sort of sense in which the negotiation that she learned how to do with the intern, she can now learn how to do. She can start a new journey
Mhm.
with her husband by allowing herself to be in the receivership position, just like Harris Dickerson. you know, there's a sense in which, he doesn't just tame the dog by dominating, but the dog also allows itself because it's going to get something in return. It's going to get pleasure. It's going to get something. So there's a negotiation happening. And so I was wondering, is she fantasizing about that, or is it kind of like a, well, in the way that humans can engage in negotiation with the wild, the animalism of us, so too can humans in their own negotiating strategies. I don't know. That's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah, I could see it that way. I think I do think there's an element of like he's gonna stick around in her head, in her erotic identity. But I agree that it doesn't necessarily like, I definitely don't think it's obviously not literal, he wouldn't bring a dog in a nice hotel. But, but yeah, I definitely think I think everything you're saying is totally on point, and it really is about, like, a woman whose sexuality is defined by her inability to ask to be given what she wants from at the beginning, whereas
Mm.
May December is about a woman who felt entitled to everything she wanted, laws be damned, frontal, lobe development be
Mm.
damned, um, and felt we were led to believe absolutely no shame about it ever, absolutely never thought she did anything wrong. She wanted something, so she
Mm.
deserved it, and as a result, she took away this man's childhood, and I think that the performance by the actor whose name I was totally rooting for to get an Oscar, now I forget it, but he was amazing.
Yes.
He held it like, the way he held himself like a 13-year-old, like, he literally
Yes.
had not aged since they had, become a partners or, since they had gotten together, he clearly hadn't aged at all. He seems younger than his son in a way,
Yeah.
which is interesting.
Exactly.
Um, and so then,
Mm.
Natalie Portman swoops into town, and I think on some level she thinks that once she's really established there, she thinks that she can kind of help him recontextualize. She tells him, "You can start over." But at the same time, she also just wants to take something from him. She wants to take like more of like the she wants to embody Gracie. So she wants the same things as Gracie in that moment because she's a real actress. So,
Yeah.
and in a way, not literally, but within the movie's depictions, she was depicted as more predatory than Gracie, because Gracie truly didn't think
Mm.
she'd done anything wrong, and obviously we're seeing them after he's, technically grown up, but Natalie Portman is just there to just take and take, and what she takes sexually, I think, is probably, like, the most, like, devastating scene, is, she takes, like,
Mm.
his naivete that, like, that this actress wanted him, and then, it's just for a story.
Yeah, it made me think. It made me understand more the scene prior because I think May December is much more a movie about making movies. It's much more a movie about art
Yes,
as well, right? But
certainly.
there's that scene when when she's in the high school, Natalie Portman is, and she's fielding questions from the students, and the one
Yeah.
kid is like, "You ever done a sex scene?" And she goes on this really interesting monologue about how, yeah, you do the sex scene, and sometimes it's just really mechanical, blah 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 blah, and then sometimes the line blurs, and you don't know if I really want this. Am I really enjoying it? And it made me think, okay, so then this sex scene, not from the perspective of Natalie Portman, and Charles Melton is the actor's name.
That's right.
Not necessarily that, although that too, but even more importantly, Natalie Portman's character is the actor acting in the scene, but the guy, he thinks it's real, and she's like, "No, this is just mechanical for me so that I can get what I need to progress in my own research in this character, but you naively crossed into that line where you thought it was real." And so I think there's this really jarring, kind of like bifurcation there that isn't
Mhm.
just about sex on screen and when actors are engaging in it, which is partly true, but also has something to do with how it is that in non-mediated life, everything is still mediated by some sense of fantasy or divisions or lines. And Sometimes it is mechanical, or sometimes we're just going through the motions, or sometimes we're just doing something because we've been taught or we think that's what we're supposed to do because of a sexualized, commercialized, pornified
Yeah.
society. And so we think that we're supposed to behave in a certain way. And then finding the difference between what's real and what's mechanical is not always so easy.
Yeah. Okay, I have 2 responses, which is, one, I wonder, because that line the line that stuck with me the most for May December was, "This is just what grown-ups do,"
It's just what grown-ups
as
do.
she's, like,
Yeah.
smoking a cigarette. A, smoking a cigarette after sex, cinematic trope number 1. Um, B, is there also a layer of, like, grown-ups, like, have, like meaningless sex as, like, a simulacrum of, like, the feelings that they want, in the same way that, like, she's doing it as, like, a simulacrum of, like, her acting.
Mm,
I don't know if I'm quite explaining, uh, but do you get what I mean? Like, she's like, when she says, "This is what adults do." If adults are doing what she does, then is everyone, like, acting through their, like, sexual lives? And then my
mm,
second thought is that my response my the way that I didn't even think about her comparison in that speech between her and what she does with, Charles Melton, because I was thinking this is a girl who's quickly becoming this is a woman who's quickly turning into Gracie. Like, we watch that
mm,
transformation, and it's eerie in a lot of ways. And given the first, like, exposure to children, because they are, like, they are
mm.
kids.
She's inappropriate.
She is just wielding her sexual power, and you can see, like, the
Mm,
boys are kinda, like, interested but uncomfortable, and, like, the daughter is just like, "What?" And it was, like, a wildly inappropriate thing to say
mhm.
in a high school, and she was, like, almost exploring what it feels like to wield your sexuality like, an inappropriate way. I thought was what I took from it. I don't know if I was reading into it too much.
No, I love that because one of the themes I think that is so strident in May, December is this issue of, like, grow the fuck up, and
Yeah.
all of the adults are kind of in a state of arrested development. Gracie is very naive and childish, even though she's in the body of a woman, and even when she seduced him, there's something about, like, um there's something immature about an adult that would engage in that type of seduction because it's just pursuing your own individual selfish pleasures, which is a very immature activity, right? There's no thought of repercussions. There's no thought of the harm you might cause to somebody else. Those are mature level conscious explorations, and she doesn't engage in that because she just wants what she wants and she takes, which is what a
Yeah.
baby does, right? Or what a child does. It wants what it wants, so it fucking takes. And she like flouts then kind of social rules because of that. So there's also this sense that she's stunted in that way. And I think even with like the way that she breaks down in bed and she basically throws like a hissy fit because somebody canceled some cake orders and stuff like that.
She
Like
threw
there's
a baby's
she threw a
tantrum.
temper tantrum. That's right. So there's a real emotional immaturity in her. Charles Melton, John, is that the character's name? He's immature because he's been stunted by her. And then here's where there's a weird binary or a weird tension. She also mothers him, which is also
Mhm.
kind of strange. She's
Yeah.
immature, but in her immaturity, probably because of her fear of actually kind of confronting her own adulthood and her own shame and her own guilt, she parents him to keep him under her thumb, to keep him immature. And so there's something interesting also about this relationship. Like, who's an adult? What is it to be an adult? And for me, the scene that really kind of unlocked the movie was when she goes
Hmm.
to the pet store and
Hmm.
she goes into the storage room. Natalie Portman.
Yeah.
Natalie Portman goes to the pet store and she's doing the research, and she goes into the pet store where the affair started and where they got caught having the illicit affair in the storage room in the back, and she imagines herself. And I turned to my wife and I was like, she's imagining herself having sex with a 13-year-old boy.
Yeah.
And so there's also something trans that she's transgressing, and I don't mean transgressive in like a
Good
revolutionary
way, yeah.
sense. Yeah. And so there's also something perverse happening there. And so this, when she says this is just what adults do later in the film, I don't think that's like the voice of wisdom being like, hey, grow up, man. This is the truth of reality. And it's like,
Oh,
yeah, you're
no.
right. You're right, Natalie Portman. She's kind of disgusting, you know?
Oh, it's so
And it's,
cruel. It's
yeah.
staggering in its cruelness because she knows he's not an adult, and unless he escapes this inescapable situation, he never will be. Um, so she was lording her adulthood over him in a way that was just I mean, that's why that line stuck with me, was I just found it so nakedly cruel.
And it's a
Um,
fucked up version of adulthood. The version of adulthood that you
that's
just
true.
take,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
That's
And
that's
it's
also kind of a distorted version of adulthood.
definitely. And I was thinking, you brought up kind of the second big theme that I felt like these two films are in almost opposition about is, I think in May December, youth is vulnerability. It's something that can be fractured and like needs to be like protected in a lot of ways. And in Baby Girl, in a lot of ways his youth is his power and
Mm,
his youthful bravado, his and I got this because I was she gives that speech to him about being right out of college and doing those interviews, and she got a question that she couldn't answer, so she went back to the interviewer and she said fuck you and got the job. And that's basically what he did to her except, like, sexually, like, he was just kinda like
mm,
he was like, it was in and I also think it comes through in her older daughter, who is, like, wise and is catching on with what's going on and is, in some ways smarter about cheating than her mom is,
mm,
because she, gets that, like, yeah, she messed up, but she was having fun, and now, like, she's forgiven, I don't know, I think that there is something about, like,
mm.
youth is power in Baby Girl, and youth is weakness in not weakness, but vulnerability in May
Yeah.
December.
Henry, what do you think, brother? Jump in here. I've heard you.
The youth
Yeah, heard you
aspect.
amening in the background.
Yeah, the youth is power, or the youth is like revitalization is interesting to me. I want to go back really quick to a phrase Austin said a few times as he described parts of Baby Girls on the nose. I find
Mm.
it very intentional in a lot of ways, at least in the first third. It was very fascinating to me how much like the movie opens on a scene of explicit intercourse, so it's telling you right away, this is a movie about sex. This is kind of our primary point of interest here. It is followed by a montage of her at her corporate life, and for like the first third of the movie, a lot of like the business talk is very clearly like double entendre and pun, and like it plays as both business talk and sex talk. And to me, that both strikes me as a sort of generational thing in the way that she conceptualizes sex in its place, and also like the movie's giving you it's giving the audience some rope to like, this movie's about sex even though they're talking about business. Like you get these puns, you get kind of like the double meaning here. And then when she starts interacting with the intern, there's an ambiguity. Like their interactions start requiring her as a character to be more like explicit or intentional about what she's
Mm,
saying or what she's asking. And I
Mm.
find that the way that works for the movie is a very cool tonal shift as far as like you think you're in for this sort of cheeky kind of like by the rules like I don't necessarily say sex thriller, but it does have kind of a sexy. It's a sexy movie. It's what you're feeling. As far as like it's playing up some tropes, you're like, oh, there's going to be an affair, and oh, there's going to be a jealous husband, and like, oh, the youth, and like, oh, there, you don't know, necessarily what's going to invert, but it's playing familiar until it's not, and the way that kind of
yes.
like shifts the movie from like a familiar kind of cozy thing into like this ambiguous, like, is he exploiting her? Is she exploiting him? Who's taking advantage of
Mm.
who here? Like, it works really well at getting under your skin with like your conceptions of like what the dynamics of the gender relationship here are, or like what you expect out of like an entertainment like this. And
And then add the other employee who, when she comes to say, "Hey, I know about this affair. You're going to stop having the affair." What she doesn't do is, "I want to be promoted. I want to run my own division. No, she just says, I'm not doing this for my own selfish things. I want you
Oh,
to
you
just
took her
step
at
up.
her word?
Oh, you did.
I
She's like, I
I
want you to
was
just step up. I
dwelling
thought that
in.
was
I
interesting.
was waiting for
Yeah.
something to come back and explode in regards to that.
I
But
thought she was a lot savvier than that. I don't know. What do you think, Henry?
I was just gonna finish this thought off by saying, but like, so a lot of this is telegraphing through like the use of cinematic device what you think a movie is going to be about, and then the movie wrenches that into like what it is about, what it actually is about, and like it's a very good piece of like it's it's harmony between like it's mise en scene, it's harmony, it's cinema, it's like it's making the idea haptic, and it's very interesting to me that on the May December side, it's completely inverted in the way that I think motivation's constantly kind of like in the air or like withheld until the end when you get to the movie within the movie scene. And at least to me, it reads extremely vapid and kind of like, was the art even worth the pursuit? And it's not until the end when you see that kind of like dissonant mess of a scene they're trying to make that it really contextualizes the whole thing for me in a really ugly way that I enjoyed, but I felt very dirty about.
I'll say this. I think Baby Girl, I read a few reviews after watching Baby Girl, and I'll be honest, I don't just say this to be a contrarian. I think everybody's reading this movie wrong that's refuted. Like everybody. Anyone who's I mean, except for us three, of course, you know.
Of course.
But I don't think this is an erotic thriller. I don't think that this is a film that is inverting power dynamics. I don't think that it's any of that shit. I think that the best way to read this movie is thinking of it like Secretary meets 50 Shades of Grey meets Canton de Pew. I laughed constantly. I
Mhm.
think Baby Girl is so fucking funny, and I think it knows that it is absurd. Like, not only does he like feed her and like she has that moment where she like guzzles the milk like staring at it like not that stuff, but even their conversation with it being so on the nose, I kind of didn't get what the movie was doing for me until that first third ended, Henry, because the first third I was like, "Oh man, is this just going to be a fucking a corporate erotic thriller that inverts the power dynamics like Fatal Attraction but in 2025 and tries to say some like clever things by just basically using concepts but through narrative?" And then it turned into something totally different and it became this really I thought interesting and awkward and quirky exploration of sex, sexuality,
Mhm.
vulnerability, power dynamics and gender politics are there, of course, but it became something much more playful. And it was the playfulness. Even the fight scene between the husband and the
Yeah.
guy was kind of funny. Like they're fighting, and then the next scene there's like that hard cut, and she comes back with
Yeah.
like 2 bags of frozen peas. Like
Laughed out loud.
even that scene, there was no like real threat. You know, like the threat. Like normally an erotic thriller is like, oh, you're gonna get fucking fired. You're going to jail,
Right.
and it talks about this, but it really like I don't know. I think the interesting things about this film are actually in exploring the gays. Not gays because there's not many gays in this movie. There's
That we
a
know
little bit
of.
in May December that we know of. In May December there are a few. Obviously Todd Haynes as well. But no, the Lacanian gays. And the reason I think it's so interesting is because it's something that we talk about a lot from the work of Laura Mulvey, who popularized the conception
Mhm.
of the male gaze. And I think that there's something interesting that Baby Girl does in exploring that. And before I kind of like talk about what I think that interesting thing is, I just want to like stop for a second because just because I've said a lot about it being kind of funny and quirky and weird and having these other things, and I think that that changes. It's not an erotic thriller. It's
Yeah.
something else, and I
I
don't really know
completely
what it is.
I think it's I think just like May December, it's kind of campy,
It's
isn't
very
it?
campy. It's very
So
campy.
I think that the truth is that we're w- w- I mean you okay, so what? You have an audience that is very reticent to see an actual like romance movie. So an actual movies really or even like movies about sex. I mean, it's so hard to find over the past like 10 years like that many like like I feel like the 90s and 80s there were constantly films about sex. There's a really good article. I can't remember where it's from, but it's basically like everyone's hot but no one's having sex in film.
Everyone's
Um
hot, but no one's sexy. It's a
yeah,
brilliant
yeah.
article.
It's
Yeah.
really good. And I was just thinking about how you have to kind of wink at the audience if you're going to make a film about sex, and you have to acknowledge that you're in this tropey space from corny things that they saw in the 80s and 90s, and
Yeah.
you have to kind of, like, play it up in certain ways, and that doesn't mean you can't have genuine, like, human feeling in it. It just means that, like, yeah, you're absolutely right. That it's not like a thrilling movie. It's yeah, they couldn't leave it at it's an erotic film because then they worried no one would go to the
There's no way to
theater.
market it. Yeah.
Yeah,
But yeah, I
exactly,
think
exactly.
the first third or maybe even the first quarter, it does set it up like that's what it's going to be.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
and in a way, I think it's also using that to acknowledge, like, hey, maybe our ways of thinking about sex and our sexual interactions is
Mm,
outdated, and we really need to crack out and reconsider what we're doing here.
and I
yeah.
also think it's a lot of credit to the filmmaker to basically be like, I'm not just going to do an updated version of Fatal Attraction, but try to make it for, like a and I say this in a cheeky way, but like for the woke generation. Like I don't think that's what she's doing. She's doing something
Right.
even more profound than that. Like it's like more interesting than what that would have been because there are attempts at that, right? But I think what makes Baby Girl so interesting is okay. So let me just fucking blab on for a minute about Lacan. So um there's some debate in film theory between some very influential figures about like how to understand, let's say, gender dynamics on screen. The most famous comes from Laura Mulvey, who popularized this conception of the male gaze, right? And a lot of people
Mhm.
talk about the male gaze today, and most of it is basically just taking her ideas. Some people update it in their own way, but really she's kind of like, she's the one who has really popularized this idea, and she's updated her own ideas on this in subsequent years, but most people are kind of stuck on the way that she first formulated in the 70s, which is essentially that like classic Hollywood cinema employs a male orientation onto female subjects, onto women subjects, right? And so that the feminine is always kind of the passive receiver of the male gaze. And she goes even further to say it's not just us as spectators, but it's actually like the technical process of making film, the way that women are shot, the way that characters are written, the way that they're dressed, the way that they're staged, et cetera, right? Um, my wife and I talk about this every once in a while. There's actually this really famous old technique that was done a lot of times on old Hollywood starlets. On the lens, they would put a little bit of
Yeah.
Vaseline on the lens to make it have like a soft glow, so that the
Mhm.
impurities are gone. It's basically a filter, right? That would be kind of an instance from Mulvey's perspective of how it is that women subjects in classic Hollywood films are subjects of a male gaze. The point that she makes for that's taken by most people today in film theory and in like political theory and things like that, is that there's a patriarchal dominance that this speaks to, that it's men who have constructed these techniques, and it's this patriarchal reproduction that kind of has made it that's how film is done. So it's taught in film schools, it's kind of taught just through osmosis as we watch more stuff. That's how we shoot kind of female subjects. So then a lot of people have, over the years, feminist filmmakers have been like, you know what, we're going to do something totally fucking different. We're going to try to change that with how it is that we shoot female subject and how we shoot male subjects in relation to yada yada, right? Okay. Todd McGowan and Joan Kopchik, they are also Lacanian theorists. They come along and they say what Mulvey's doing is like, yeah, she may be talking about a certain tendency, but that actually she misunderstands Lacan's gaze. And Joan Kopchik, she writes about this in her book in the 90s, directly basically kind of critiquing Mulvey's angle on it. And her argument is this, her argument is that actually the gaze for Lacan is not a look. It is not the look. That there's a distinction between the look and the gaze. The gaze is actually the object. The look is the subjective, like when we look at something. That's like John Berger kind of like ways of
Yeah.
seeing, like, look at the gaze for Kopchak and for McGowan following this, and kind of as he expands on this more, is that actually what the gaze does is it presents us with a limit of ever actually being able to master any object. And it reveals to us the weaknesses of our desire. So the way that we could think about that in simpler terms is that for Mulvey, the gaze is patriarchal dominance, kind of like controlling and then reproducing how it is that we control the look onto the feminine subject. Whereas for Kopchak and McGowan, what the gaze does is it actually reveals the impossibility of that. The gaze is us confronting the real of our desires. And so for them, the reason that's so interesting is that that means that every film ultimately speaks of some sort of like political inability of all of our desires from actually being realized. And what Hollywood tries to do with its like slick filmmaking and by like wrapping up stories with little bows on top and stuff like that is it tries to obscure that by giving us happy endings or by bathing us in the fantasy so that we don't actually confront the impossibilities of our desires from ever being realized and ever being satisfied, but that actually in reality the gaze is always there saying no, 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 no. So Baby Girl, I think a really interesting way of seeing Baby Girl is that Baby Girl is a film about precisely that, the impossibility of any desires from ever actually being truly satisfied. And I think even the ending, even though we could say there's like that little bow that's like, no, now she has learned how to kind of negotiate and now she's found her capacity for pleasure. Maybe because there's that cross section where or that intercut with her and like, then there's like him and Harris Dickerson and the dog. Maybe what's being said is not like it's not saying she's a dog and it's not saying she's now a submissive, but it's more about like now begins the negotiation, but the negotiation is always perpetual because there's no way that we ever have control or mastery over our sexuality or anybody else's sexuality or any of our desires whatsoever because we're always confronted by the limit and by the impossibility of that. I don't know. I know that's kind of saying a lot of shit, but that's what I think is really interesting about what Baby Girl does. And I think it happens in May, December too, but that's
Well,
the
May
kind of like
December.
debate. And yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, keep. Oh, so I was just
No,
gonna
no,
say,
yeah, yeah.
when you were saying all of this, I was thinking about how it's interesting that Natalie Portman's entire job is to go and witness and gaze upon these people and understand them and make sense of them, and they're the object of her gaze the whole time, and it's making Julianne more crazy. She keeps saying, like, I can't get that girl is driving me nuts. Um, and uh, it ultimately, what, this is like half a response to you, half a response to something Henry said, where I feel like the great payoff of May December, of course, is that, the film is as because both films are like self-interrogatory, uh like the film is saying, did we just make a TV movie about
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah, yeah.
13-year-old who married his high
Yeah.
school teacher? It's literally asking that, and I think that is so fascinating. And then I think with
Mm.
sorry, I lost my train of thought. You guys said so many interesting things in like 3 minutes, then I had so many thoughts and they're floating away. But I think, yeah, I think, yeah, basically, I
The
mean,
I
I feel like but I feel like Baby Girl is saying that like you can maybe get what you want if you're brave enough to negotiate. Like, I think they did have they definitely had a satisfying sexual relationship. It clearly wasn't meant to last forever, but, I mean, I think it is saying that she could be getting more of what she wanted.
Yeah, thinking of the May December kind of finale and reveal of the movie, is it suitable for the gaze? Is it an object powerful enough to like be worth the gaze? Like, is it worth obsessing over if the end thing is not is just kind of a destructive? We made this thing. It's a cynical piece of entertainment. Here you go.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
and maybe
absolutely.
and maybe then what both films do is they frustrate us as the audience, because every film like bakes into it like our fantasies, right? Like otherwise, why would they make the movie? You know, they're trying to seduce audiences to come and be in a kind of a receivership, you know,
Right.
with the movie, right? So, but I think what's so interesting is what Baby Girl does is it sets us up with a certain set of expectations. And it says this is going to be, you know what this is. It's an erotic thriller. Come and see, you know, Nicole Kidman seduce a young man. And then you're like, oh, wait, but that's not what's happening. And then like it gets a little bit weirder and you're like, oh, wait, no, he's gonna take advantage because he's actually in a position of power because she's gonna get fired. And then wait, no, that's not what's happening either. And then he starts like fucking waffling on about consent and trust. And you're like, what the fuck? And then she's got this relationship with her husband. And the whole time, I feel like we are constantly, our expectations and our desires are subverted because we desire the erotic thriller. We desire
Yeah.
50 Shades of Grey. We desire the film that's been made because that's what's been made before. And this film then gives us something else. So at the end, maybe Nicole Kidman does find a path towards perpetuating her own pleasure with her husband, but we then are left thinking, what does that mean for me? Like, how do we get there? Like, okay, that's what I mean.
Okay, I think this is a bow. Um, I think like Baby Girl is both about, like, giving something to the audience, and May December is about taking something away from the audience as well, from the
Mm.
characters. May December is taking away your enjoyment of what you just watched to some extent, or at least is
Yeah,
challenging it. It's saying, "You're kind of a sicko for wanting to
you're a
watch like,
pervert. Yeah,
this is
yeah,
what you wanted to see, you pervert." And
yeah.
Baby Girl is saying, you know, you is I think is proposing that, you know, if you cheat on your husband, you're not a horrible person and you might be able to even reconcile and be
Mm.
stronger for it. It's saying that like the parts of you that you are scared to explore might be like some of the more meaningful parts of yourself, and that like you shouldn't and that you shouldn't be so afraid of them. So I feel like
So May
yeah.
December is judging you and saying you're a fucking pervert, and Baby Girl is being like, hey, find your perversions in a good way.
I think
Exactly.
Yeah.
even going off of, if Baby Girl is about going like these things aren't working, let's look for something new. I think May December is desperately about trying to construct sense out of something damaging, and it's just not working. Uh,
Yeah.
got Noah Little in the chat asking, which would you watch first, or which should they watch first between Baby Girl and May December? Do you feel there's a
Mm.
particular order that complements the viewing here?
I want to say what I did first, but maybe that's just because I liked the experience of both. I saw May December first,
I did
just
the
because of
opposite.
sequentiality. Uh,
Mm.
and I liked it. I don't know. I guess it's like I think one yeah, I don't know. Why do you think that you did it right, Austin?
I mean, I wish I had a fucking time machine and I could see what the experience was like. I did it as a double feature. I watched them back to back with my
Okay.
wife. Like we literally, I was before we started watching them, I was like, oh, I haven't done a double feature in like years since I was in grad school, trying to like catch up on all the greatest films of all time. And I was like, I'm watching like 7 films in a day or some shit like that, you know? I haven't done that in forever, but I literally we put one on. There was 15-minute break, 20-minute break. Watch the second one right after, and that was interesting because then we just got to like fucking bathe in all of these themes and things like that. So I kind of feel like for me, the way that I did it is like the only way that I could see it done. And now I'm like, oh fuck, what would it be like if you go through like the uncomfortable and like indictment of Todd Haynes movie, and then you go to, hey, try to explore, you know, in a healthy adult way, you know, and you're like, oh yeah, like
Like
it's a totally
as if
different vibe.
that's possible.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I think it
Yeah,
depends how I think if you wanna be a little more unsettled at the end, start with Baby Girl, and if you wanna feel a
rest
little less
easy.
unsettled, start with May December.
Yeah.
Does that seem
Henry,
right?
what
I
about
don't know.
you? Yeah, you got a
I
thought?
so I saw May December first, and then I saw Baby Girl just because order of release. I've seen each of them once. I feel like you want to start with May December and then move into Baby Girl, and then if you have the time, I'd go for May December a second time. It has the features of
Mhm.
construction where I think watching it a second time is very beneficial. I think you should rewatch as many movies as you can. A good movie stands up to scrutiny multiple times, but just the way that final scene works for me in May December is kind of a recontextualization that I think makes the movie worth revisiting sooner rather than later.
There's this great idea that I like to think about often from Lacan again. It's called the quilting point. And the idea is that like human meaning is made up of a chain of signifiers, right? Or of just like signs, let's say, for lack of a better term, you know? And when I'm talking in a sentence, you might not know what I'm gonna do until I get to the end. And then I stop. And the punctuation, the period or the full stop, that's the quilting point. It's what quilts together all of the kind of things that I was saying beforehand and makes them make sense. So I think if you look at May December, that final scene, like every film is a quilting point in a lot of ways. That final scene,
Yeah,
definitely, but especially May December because it changes
Everything.
everything. It just went before. Whereas Baby Girl, it kind of is like a culmination, you
Hmm.
know? With May December, it's like, oh no, like what you just watched for the last 2 hours, it means something different now.
Yeah. And it's really cool to rewatch and see all the signs that point to
yeah.
that once you've been disillusioned. Yeah, it's so
May
true.
December is doing a lot of scene for scene obfuscation to where you're kind of questioning the motivation constantly. Whereas like Baby Girl is earnestly going like, "Hey, take this trip with us."
I think that's right. I think that's right. And I think that's the same thing as kind of what I was saying, like May December's taking away from from the usual movie going excitement, and Baby Girl is like giving into it in a lot of ways. Anyway, yeah.
Okay, so
I don't know.
I don't love doing I oftentimes talk about like my least favorite type of analysis is like is it a good movie or did you like it, right? Like I'm like, yeah, like fine. Like what fine. I'm much more interested in these kinds of discussions. Like what's interesting about it? What can we take? What can we learn? Blah 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 blah. But with that said, Amanda, you said that you go back and forth on which film you like better, right?
I think yes. Okay, wait, but I have
Let's so
a new answer.
let's do the yeah, go ahead. Let's do the thing that I just bullshitted about a minute ago that said I don't like to do, but I think it's kind of fun because this is a versus, so we might as well let's give the audience what they want a little bit, and let's make the flaming hot take. If you have to choose one in a battle royale, walk us through your decision.
Okay. I think May December is like probably the better film of the two, like formally and such. I think I think like but I think pulling the rug out from under the viewer doesn't necessarily make for a challenging like viewing experience. It's almost like an I gotcha at the end. And I think Baby Girl is constantly pulling the rug out from you. So in some ways, I
Mm-hmm.
think Baby Girl might be a more interesting film and May December might be a better film.
Oh, that's great. I think I like that. I think especially for people who haven't seen Baby Girl, if you go into it like just don't think that this is an erotic thriller and
Yeah.
don't think like just go into it and let it take you where it's going to take you. And I think almost if you think of the film as just like one big giant conceptual metaphor, then I think it makes it, like, so fun and weird and my wife turned to me at one point and she was like, "Why are there so many parties?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah." It's like a Christmas party and then a birthday party and then a
That's
rave
so
club, and it's
true.
like, and I was like, in some ways, it's kind of paint by numbers because but in another way, it's got just, like it's giving you everything that you would expect from an erotic thriller, but without doing the erotic thriller thing. And I think if you just go in, I actually think it's a lot of fun. And I think it's really fucking funny. And I think it's really weird and surreal. And I'm almost like, of course a European filmmaker had to make this movie because
Yeah.
Americans take themselves too seriously, and like Brits are too self-deprecating and too kind of like weird with sex. So it had to be someone from the continent, you know? And it's like with that sensibility, because it's like they kind of just see the world in a different way. You know, the French get this, the Dutch get this, the Danes get this, you know? There's something interesting about this kind of perspective on things, but I don't know. Oh,
Yeah,
all that to
Wait,
say,
you didn't say which is better,
yeah,
which
all that to say, I think May December. I mean, I think May December is actually like a brilliant movie. Like I think it's fucking amazing. I think as a movie, I think the writing is just tight. I think it's interesting. I think it's captivating. It's got intrigue. I think it's a better movie. I think fun, you know, Baby Girl's more fun. But like for me, May December is just catnip for a nerd like me that is like, you
yeah.
know, I just think I mean, Todd Haynes is brilliant on cinematology. Raymond and I talked about his first film, Poison, which you haven't seen. Which, if you haven't seen, I would recommend going to see it. But I think he's a genius.
Yeah.
For you know, and I know we throw that term around, and there's probably like 10 people that we should reserve that right to in American cinema. But I think Todd Haynes is up there. He's amazing.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about the bugs in May
Yeah, the
December.
bugs.
The
Yeah,
bugs.
yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
god. Wait, but first, Henry, answer the question of all questions, the worst question of all questions.
So I'm gonna go with Baby Girl because the
Hmm.
montage where he pours the milk in the plate is just very fun, and the music's perfect. And I can't. I just really enjoy the sense of joy it has. The whole Austin bringing up, that's not a sex thriller. It's just a sex movie. It's free of the sort of Protestant guilt or
Yeah.
shame or like anxiety that
Yes.
you're going to get murdered over this transgression. It doesn't have that.
Yeah, and that's why I think the European
It's European.
sensibility,
Yeah.
because they've already moved past that. Americans, they're just still stuck in it, and maybe in 100 years we'll get past it too. But I think Europeans, they've kind of moved past that a little bit, you know. Right. But yeah, okay. So final thoughts as we start to wind down. Talk about the bugs in May December.
Okay, so yeah, the I almost called him the kid. I always forget his name. Is his name John? Uh
The character's name is
yeah,
John.
John. So John
Or
has this
Joe. I'm sorry, Joe.
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 Joe has
Joe.
this thing where this hobby where he like saves butterfly chrysalises. Is that right? Is that the and helps them grow.
Monarch
Of
butterflies.
course, yeah, monarchs. And it's almost too on the nose, but it's filmed so beautifully and he cares so much that I like I just kind of like let it go. Like it's so obviously like he didn't get to grow up and like he got kind of yanked out of the chrysalis before he was ready, and so now he's like obsessed with these beings that are about to proceed into their adult lives if only they're cared for the way he wasn't.
Mm. And there's also he's got like a little secret under the table crush with this
Yeah.
other monarch butterfly farmer, and I think it reveals so much to us his about what's not fulfilled in his life as an adult is
Mm,
one, we do see Gracie, infantilizing him and mothering him. He's not treated as an equal.
mm-mm,
He wasn't allowed to grow. And this other person, she kind of becomes, he mentions her at one point when he's talking to Natalie Portman's character. Um, and I think she kind of becomes like this possibility that he never had, to be able to like be a teenager and text somebody that you have a crush on, and you say like, "Oh, we should go here one day to Mexico," kind of thing. And it's like those kinds of childhood dreams that he probably didn't get to pursue because his teenage years were kind of taken away from him, when she was in prison. So there's a lot of interesting things that kind of little storyline, actually, there's a lot of work that it performs in a really interesting way.
yeah,
You know?
I totally
Yeah.
agree.
Henry, do you have any final thoughts before we land the plane?
No, I think I got it pretty much all out. This is making me really crave getting back to May December. It may have won between the two if I rewatched it more recently, but I mean, Baby Girl,
Mm.
fresh on the brain.
Yeah, go out, check them out. Baby Girl, at least in Australia, is still in cinemas. There are other ways to watch it online, but May December is out on kind of all the streaming platforms and things like that because obviously it came out in 23. So, it's out on all the streamers and stuff like
Yeah.
that, so you can check it out that way. Baby Girl might be a little bit harder to find depending on your area, but did you watch, is it a streamer for you guys?
Yeah, it's up for rent on various digital platforms now.
You can
Yeah.
rent it or find it other places.
Yeah, it's there's a digital version up on the internet now.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Amanda.
Yeah,
For
thanks for
everybody out there
having me.
listening, thanks for tuning in. Remember, you can email us wisecrack. Oh God, wisecrack.smt. I always forget. Wisecrack. Let me get my thing up.
I'll put it on the screen.
Wisecrack. It's on the screen. Wisecrack.smtm@gmail.com. Wisecrack.smtm@gmail.com. You can also hit us up on the Letterboxd, SMTM Pod. And we will be back next week. And I believe
We're
Henry?
doing Conclave, yes.
We're doing
Hell
Conclave.
yeah.
Have you seen Conclave, Amanda?
Oh yeah, oh my God. But I saw a tweet before I saw it that was Conclave is just Gossip Girl meets the Vatican.
Yeah.
And the whole time I was just picturing all of them like around the fountain at Gossip Girl. And it's a really funny way to experience the film. It's a great film though.
Because on the Wisecrack 2 channel, there's actually a video on
I did not
Conclave,
rate
right?
that one.
There is a
that.
video
Yeah,
on
but
Conclave though, yes.
Yeah, so if y'all want to check that out as well, there's more Wisecrack content out there for
Always
you.
more content.
Awesome. Well, Amanda, do you want to say goodbye to everybody? You can send us off.
Yeah, thanks so much for hanging out. Watch those 2 movies, they're fun, and let us know what you think about age gap romances.
Later.
Bye.